one of the fun things about the show is that we have the freedom to cover any issue that we want to cover. And we talk about streets and sidewalks and sewers and children and state aid to education and police and fire. But today we're going to talk about something different, and we have with us a guest who we're delighted to welcome to the show and to Burlington, Vermont. That is Dr. David Greenwald.
Thank you.
Who is a clinical psychologist.
That's correct.
Okay. And David has, may I call you David?
Please.
Okay. Has just come out with a book which is co-authored with Stephen Zeitlin. And the title of the book is No Reason to Talk About It, Families Confront the Nuclear Taboo. And I am excited about the book. I have to be honest and say I have not yet read it, but I will. And for those people who are interested, the book is on sale here in Burlington at the Little Professor Bookshop. And what this book deals with, I think, is a subject of enormous importance to all of us, including those of us who are parents. And that is the understanding that the children of America, and I presume the children of the world, are correctly scared to death about nuclear war and the fact that on a given day they might die. And what this book addresses is the fact that that reality exists on a certain level, but on another level it is not an issue that we're discussing terribly much publicly. David, can you maybe tell us a little bit what you've covered in your book?
Well, that's right, Bernie. What we wanted to look at was there's a body of research, a growing body of research, everything from Gallup polls to a survey which was sponsored by the American Psychiatric Association, which is hardly a hotbed of controversy or critical thought. This body of research does indicate that children are A, aware that nuclear weapons exist, and B, are frightened by that fact, and that a great many children, usually between a quarter and a third of children in any given study, will say things like, I don't think I'm going to grow up, and I don't think that I'm going to be able to live out my life. Now, as psychologists, that made us think, how does developmental psychology, which is the area that studies children, how do you have a development that has an artificial endpoint? How do you have a development which implies a future with a sense that there isn't going to be a future? And as family therapists, we work constantly with families to try and understand and help children within families, feeling that particular social unit has a tremendous impact on children and can be quite helpful to children. So we wanted to see how could families discuss this with their children in a useful, productive way for everybody involved.
Am I correct in assuming that a lot of families, that the issue itself is so depressing,
mm-hmm.
it's so frightening, mm-hmm. that people just don't want to deal with it?
Yes. I mean, that's one of the reasons we call our book Families Confront the Nuclear Taboo, is the subtitle, that our sense is that this is a somewhat taboo subject for a lot of people. That not only is it that it's depressing and frightening, but what we found particularly was that parents, even more than children, are unwilling to discuss it, because parents, as you know, want, the whole idea of being a parent is to see one's child into adulthood and to provide a safe, meaningful, satisfying world for one's children. And the feeling that you can't do that, the feeling that is limited, is so upsetting to parents that they don't want to bring it up. They don't know what to tell their children. And when the children bring it up, they tend to get one word or one sentence answers. Don't worry about it. It's not going to happen. Don't concern yourself about that. Study hard in school. Take care of what you can do something about.
Okay, David, what do you recommend to parents in terms of how to deal with this issue?
Okay, the first thing we certainly recommend is to hear rather than tell, as in many issues, what's going on with the children. Where are they coming from? What do they know? What have they heard? And how have they put it together? Because at various ages, that's very different. With young children, there's often, young children are often quite literal, so that one child thought that one bomb would break up the whole world. Now that's in fact not the case, and as the mother said to us, gee, I don't know if that's better or worse if one bomb destroyed the whole world. But at least children want to be heard on the subject, and the major thing we found was that children want to feel competent. Children want to feel industrious. That Erik Erikson, one of the great psychiatrists of the 20th century, called at least the ages of 6 to 12 all about industry versus inferiority. Children can either feel industrious, they can either feel competent, that they're mastering information and mastering aspects of their world, or they can feel inferior. And on this subject, parents feel inferior, so it's difficult for parents to give children that sense of industriousness. What we do find is that when we had these conversations, we thought, well, we better be very careful, and we better approach this topic very carefully with children. The children were quite matter-of-fact and very eager to discuss it. The parents had much more trouble. So the first thing we're saying is, parents, be aware that your children know, be willing to hear them, be willing to sit down with them and talk. Be willing to, basically we kind of say that on 4 key dimensions this affects families, that families either can contact this issue or isolate it and not contact it at all. We obviously feel it's better to contact it than to isolate it. We feel that the issue acts on families and on all of us in a way that either engenders a sense of community or engenders a separation. And again, we feel it's enormously important that children feel that they're not alone on this, that they have a sense of community, that they be part of a larger community, and that children be aware that there are people all over the world working on nuclear weapons, that even people who may disagree with us, regardless of our point of view, whether we think the way to go is peace through strength or we think the way to go is through reduction of arms, that children are reassured when they think that there aren't monsters out there that want to drop these immediately and blow us all to smithereens. That's reassuring, and to connect them with a sense of community. The third is the dimension is we call hope versus despair. And this is a tricky one because most people avoid that issue altogether. You know, we walk around with all kinds of false hopes, following false gurus and messiahs and so on. And every latest product is sold and pitched in terms of the hope that it's going to change your life. And it seems to us a lot of this false hope that's out there today that people are desperate for is to try and avoid a kind of inner sense of despair over the whole topic. And what we're saying is, clearly children have to be encouraged, and as adults do, to maintain hope, but what is that hope going to be based on? Perhaps the way to get to that hope is to feel some of the despair about the state of the world, and with that feeling to begin to act to change it and begin to do something.
Talk about the latter point. You're a psychologist,
Yeah.
You've written the book, but you also act to try to change that situation.
Sure.
I'm sure you have the hope that someday another book like this will not have to be written, because
sure.
there will not be that nuclear threat hovering over millions of children.
Yeah.
What do you do about it?
Well, what I do about it is try and do something. I think what we know, what we as mental health workers know is that the best antidote to depression, the best antidote to despair is some form of action. Whether the issue is alcoholism or abuse or poverty or nuclear weapons, doing something, feels better than not doing something and sitting around and feeling helpless and hopeless, which are the worst feelings in the world. As one grandfather put it, he said, maybe we'll win and maybe we won't in terms of getting rid of nuclear weapons and getting rid of war. He said, but at least we have to give it a shot because that's going to feel better than just worrying. And it does feel better.
Let me ask you this. One does not have to be a psychiatrist to understand that the issue of war, and especially nuclear war, has a profound psychological effect upon children. I mean, you don't have to be an expert to know that. Any more than you have to be an expert to know that kids watching garbage on television for 50 or 60 hours a week obviously affects them. What astounds me to no end is the general cowardiceness. Is that the word, cowardiceness?
Cowardice.
Of the psychiatry profession and most psychologists who somehow
Yeah.
manage to avoid those issues.
Yeah.
They deal with the personal problems of a family, but don't have the courage to say that many of those problems are caused by what happens in society, and that in fact what happens in society very often is a result of political action.
Yeah.
Okay? Do you find that? Am I exaggerating the problem, or am I not?
Yes and no. I mean, we've been very, very much encouraged by support in professional organizations. Stephen Zeitlin and I and our teams really met at a conference of the American Ortho-Psychiatric Association, which kind of covers all the mental health professions. So there has been some institutional support. Even the American Psychiatric Association, funded a task force on children's fears of nuclear war. They haven't been totally silent on the subject. They've been probably a little bit better than the society as a whole. In all fairness, obviously, when we go to conferences and we present our findings of this kind of research and recommendations, we get about 30, 40 people coming to our workshops, and a workshop on building your private practice gets 200.
What about real estate investments with your profits? How does that?
They don't have too much of that at our conferences. But part of that, though, I think is also the topic that we're talking about. It is an upsetting topic. People do feel, what am I going to do about it? What is my responsibility to do something about it? And that raises a certain amount of anxiety. It's easier, it's safer, it's in some ways more clear-cut and more satisfying to say, let me build my practice and make a lot of money, and maybe I can't give my kids the security of knowing that it's a world without war or a nuclear-free world, but I'll make it up to them by giving them Benetton shirts and all the latest products.
I'm not sure that I agree with you, Bill. I think what it gets down to often, in my view, is you have. Psychiatry is a good business. What does the average psychiatrist make? 100,000, 50,000? Who knows? They make a lot of money. It's a good business. And why do you have to get in trouble by raising issues which are going to put you into a confrontation with the basic movements of society, political movements of society? It would seem to me that an honest psychiatrist who is interested about the mental health of his or her patients has got to deal not only with the issues of war and peace, the issue of pressure on the job.
Sure.
We can't deny that the quality of the workplace,
Sure.
pressure that people are put under, or many of the basic mores of capitalist society have a tremendous impact. The competition, the need to succeed, the need to have more than the Joneses affects the way that people live. And yet it is amazing how few people in psychology or psychiatry speak up. Some do, certainly.
Some do, and in some sense, it's some of the values in psychology are run counter to some of those values.
Yeah.
We certainly, many more psychologists preach or talk about the virtues of cooperation vis-a-vis competition. We certainly try and help people, lower some of the stress of that competition. But it's also a profession that happens within a particular society and reflects a lot of the values of that society. It's within it and tries to be outside of it a little bit at the same time.
I know some years back I had, we're changing the topic. I didn't necessarily want to do that. I would like to continue that. I am sometimes become exasperated with people who are professors at the university or are in the various professions, because I feel that they have the real opportunity, with the respect that goes with their profession, to have an impact upon the world that they're living, much more so than many other people, and that don't exercise that.
Sure.
Well, and that's why it is exciting when you have groups like Physicians for Social Responsibility. People say, oh my God, physicians are speaking up and saying we've got to get rid of nuclear weapons. I say that, but I'm just a politician.
Right.
But when physicians say that, when Dr. Spock says that,
sure,
it has a more of an impact. And I really wish that people in the professions had more courage to speak out on these issues.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're certainly doing what we can to try and change that, as well as to make some of the connections between the larger social context and the impact that context, that setting has on families and on children growing up. That's clearly, very, very central to our work here. The last dimension that we deal with in the book is one of commitment versus emptiness. That there has to be, just as there has to be a commitment in the family to raising children, a commitment to putting up with the aggravation that is implicit in any long-term relationship, there has to be, and the alternative to that kind of commitment is really a kind of emptiness in life. That our sense is that in the nuclear age there's some of that same carryover to the larger issues, that there has to be a commitment to the world family as well as to one's own individual families, and a beginning to see things in that kind of interdependent way rather than purely in terms of the most limited forms of self-interest. That too leads to a kind of emptiness in the youth which needs to be filled up with constantly increasing stimulation.
I mean, it seems almost by definition that with nuclear weapons that could blow up the world, there has to be a natural gravitation toward the global issues.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you not? So what else?
What else about what?
About anything. It's a. We've wandered a little bit from the basic subject. Would you like to go back again to the work that you do with kids, or?
Sure. I think the other thing we found was that a lot of the parents were people my age who grew up in the 50s, who remember air raid drills, who remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, who remember that kind, those kinds of events. And it's hard, I think, again, talking to parents here, it's hard for parents to acknowledge their own history on this issue, their own fears that they may have grown up with. But probably the hardest thing for parents, we had parents sit down with us, Bernie, and tell us that, they have planned out, they have actually thought out that in case of a nuclear attack, they have stockpiled poison and they're going to give it to their kids.
I was just thinking what you were saying a few minutes ago, and one of the interesting points that you've made is that as hard as this whole thing is on children, it's perhaps harder on parents.
Yeah.
And you sit and you think, and you say, what a horrible thing. You raise your kid.
Yeah.
You have to go through all the craziness of raising children.
Right.
So that, as you say, you could see your kids do well in life, live
Right.
out a good, healthy and happy life. And you're hopeless. You're helpless. You're helpless. Some moron someplace is going to press a button for whatever particular insane reason they may have, political or psychiatric problems that they have, and blow up all the children.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes
gruesome prospect.
It's gruesome, and you really see. It's like parents often say when parents lose children, and I'm sure you probably deal with that in your private practice.
Sure.
It's a terrible thing,
right.
and so often parents feel it's not natural.
Right.
A parent should die before his or her child should die.
Right.
And I think the same principle exists here, that you're helpless while your own child is being killed by idiots. And oof.
That's exactly the correct analogy.
And the rage that you feel, the anger, and I think when you talk about the need for kids to talk about it, I think that there must be. For example, if you would see a situation where a criminal would come into a room and take children hostage and shoot them,
right.
What would the rage of a parent be?
Sure.
And in a certain sense, you're not dealing with something terribly different now.
Yeah, there certainly is that element. Yeah, and we try and talk about that anger. Anger is clearly something that therapists are used to dealing with and trying to help focus in a constructive way, of how to take that anger and take that rage and do something with it.
But what do you correct? To me, when you say do something, and I think you indicated about that earlier, obviously in one way or another, you're talking about politics, aren't you? Or
politics in the broadest sense.
In the broadest sense, absolutely.
Yes. Politics in the broadest sense. Politics in terms of one of the fathers in our interview said to us, I can't talk to, said during the interview, it's hard to talk to my kids about this because with other things that are difficult to talk to the kids about, I can say to them things that are clear and given prescriptions. Don't ride with strangers. Don't take candy from people, etc., etc. Those kinds of things. With this, what do you say? And what you say is you hear first of all what kids' ideas, because sometimes they have wonderfully magnificent ideas on the whole subject. But even for the families to be able to discuss that, even for the families to be able to say, maybe this could happen, maybe that could happen, maybe this could happen, at least they're approaching it with a sense of action and competence instead of despair and hopelessness.
Right.
And at this point, we don't try and say, well, this is what everybody should do. Everybody should join Physicians for Social Responsibility, or everybody should vote, different party into power, or anything like that, because what we're trying to say is that for those kind of actions, there may not be one prescription for every family. That some families, from these discussions, one guy did get involved. He happens to be a psychologist who's a research psychologist for a defense think tank in Pennsylvania. And he now volunteers in his spare time to go out and give talks for Physicians for Social Responsibility about some of the weapons that he is helping devise. It's an interesting dichotomy, but that's the way he's trying to deal with it. A number of the people, and this is clearly something that we feel simpatico with, is say that the solution is communication. That if enough people can talk about this, and if enough people can talk about it in the family, in the community, in the nation, in the world, if people can keep communicating about it, then people can find a solution to it. That there are basically, two ways to go with this thing. You can either look for the technical fix and the technical solutions, a la bigger and better bombs or bigger and better defense shields, magical defense shields, which have to do with technology. And the people who really got off on those fantasies, that were fascinatingly enough, were pre-adolescent boys, 10, 11, 12-year-old boys, always think in terms of, let's build something. One kid was going to build a time machine so that we'd go to a time after the war. He had already given up on not having the war, but he was going to build a time machine, and go to after the war and recreate civilization. Maybe he could get a government grant for that. But that age boy looks for a technological fix, and a lot of the other people said, it's not a technological issue, it's a human issue, and what we have to do is we have to begin to communicate with each other, we have to begin to communicate with the Russians, we have to begin to communicate with other countries, and really see that we're all essentially in the same boat here, and we're all part of the same family.
Exactly, and I think in the process of communication, I think when parents realize how helpless they feel and how angry they feel, who wants to see a child get killed? For what reason? Okay, and I think the more the people are able to see that, the more likelihood there is for society as a whole to make demands on the political leaders to make peace, to force them to make peace. I think when people keep this in and they're not even aware of it, it isn't raised to the level that it should be. Everybody is frightened to death, and yet if you're not talking about it, you're not, in a certain sense.
That's right. And its effect, and what we know from all kinds of other forms of mental health, that when we don't talk about something and we don't address it, it tends to have a weirder impact on us and a more devious way of it coming out than if we're discussing it directly.
Sure, it is the burning issue in everybody's life, and yet it is not. It's something in a certain sense that should be talked about 24 hours a day until the bloody thing is resolved. And I'm afraid that it's not, and it goes on and on.
Right. That's that's certainly what we kind of came up with. But of course, people have to live lives, and they have to, keep going, and they have to try and raise kids, and build cities, and heal souls, and do other things besides doing that. So there has to be some kind of balance. People have to be able to talk about it, and people have to be able to bring it up and find and create mechanisms for dealing with it, because I think that's been part of the lesson for us, because not only did we get involved in this and decided to really research how families discuss this, but this has led us in a whole other tack, which perhaps you'd like to get into too.
Please.
Of again, as family therapists, we had the notion of, wouldn't it be great? This was actually an idea that kind of got generated from something a patient of mine said. And he's a car mechanic, and he said to me, if we could bring 1 million Russians over here to hang out on street corners, and we could send 1 million Americans over there to hang out on street corners, we'd get to know each other as people,
right, exactly.
and the problem would be solved. Okay?
Absolutely.
And we said, we can't do that.
Sure you can. In terms of...
But we have television.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
But, you got two things. One of the things this is public access that you're
right.
on, and it's I often mention this. It's recently established, this is the first year we've had it in Burlington, and I'm very excited about it, and the city puts money into it precisely because because commercial television is so horrendous, in my view. And television is a mechanism where people can come forward and say what's on their minds
right.
without being interrupted. At least cable access is every 20 seconds
right.
with a commercial. But the truth is, considering the fact that our nation spends $300 billion on the military, you know what? You could spend the money to take 1 million Americans, send them over to the Soviet Union, and it would be a tiny fraction
That's true.
of what the military budget is. And the idea, and we're beginning to do that recently, actually, in Middlebury College, I read in the paper. They are now able to transmit Soviet television programs right here, and vice versa.
Right.
But there's, something that blew my mind some years back. The Olympics serves a very important function, especially since it's televised. You see all these, these terrible comedies who are out to nuke, and it's. I remember this one because we're a little bit older. Nadia Comaneci. Everyone remember Nadia Comaneci, the little Romanian? You don't remember. You were too young, right? You remember?
I remember her.
She's a darling little. She was a 12-year-old Romanian who spun, 80 times in the air. Everybody loved Nadia.
Yeah.
And of course, the truth is, she's a commie, and we're supposed to hate her. And it was disarming that everyone fell in love with Nadia, and they said, "Oh my God, let's have Nadia in our home. We all love Nadia."
Right.
So it turned out that the Romanians are not necessarily terrible communist atheists who wants to murder us. They also raise nice children who are good gymnasts. And just that's what, and when the athletes get together every 4 years.
But this was our notion. Our notion was that we wrote a proposal for a. Donahue's done some of the space bridges.
That's right.
Where you get a group of Americans and a group of Russians and have interactive television.
That's right.
Well, we thought, rather than have it be two anonymous groups of people, have it be a family, one family in America and one family in Russia, and have them talk directly to each other about what's it like to raise children, what's it like to date, what's it like to hide from your parents, and
it's a funny story.
Catch a cigarette or a beer. Let me just finish it. We proposed this idea. We had this proposal. We got it. The deputy Soviet ambassador to the UN came to Philadelphia, and we talked to him about the idea. He invited us up to the UN to talk to him in New York some more. He sent our proposal on to Moscow. Last year, we got a telex saying, "We like your idea for a television show. Please come and talk to us." So we were over there.
No kidding.
Just a bunch of therapists. Small town,
So
Philadelphia therapists, and we went over there and we got Soviet television to co-produce it.
Congratulations, that's fantastic.
Which was just, some people deciding we're going to act on our own and see what we can accomplish.
That is fantastic.
The trick is we haven't gotten it off the ground in this country yet because, the commercial stations are having a little bit more trouble with it. Not for political reasons, just
viewing audience.
Yeah, surely we're not. Their concern is, purely we're not going to get the numbers that we need to, with the expense of this kind of program. So it's been an incredible education for us and incredibly frustrating. But we were over there and we were meeting people and we were talking, and as difficult a place as that is in a lot of ways,
and the bureaucracy is horrendous too.
Yes,
but it's
we still made some human connections with people there.
I think ultimately the cheapest fix, if you like, is to do exactly that. We have a sister city program here in Burlington with a town in Nicaragua. You see, and very often Nicaraguans will come here. We had the ambassador from Nicaragua here a couple of weeks ago. Many people have been here from Nicaragua. And the truth of the matter is, you see, after all the propaganda and all the hate and all the lies, when you end up sitting down and talking to somebody, it may well be you don't even like the person. Maybe you don't like him. But you know what? You say, I don't think I should kill you.
Yeah. Sure.
I don't think I should wipe out your whole country.
Yeah.
And television, I believe, and you're absolutely right, is an important technology because it allows us to see the people. Remember, you ever read those books in World War One? These the Huns, who did, you create stereotypes of people. They're faceless, terrible, yellow hordes or racial epithets, and then you can go out and kill them because they're not human.
Yeah.
But what television does is make people, you say, Jesus, this guy looks a little bit like the guy across the street.
Exactly.
And then it's a little bit harder to kill him.
Yeah.
And I think you're right.
And that's exactly what we've been trying to do is essentially that in preparation for any war, you have to dehumanize the
Precisely.
enemy and put an inhuman face on that enemy.
Right.
And show them as monsters or show them as devils.
It's a funny thing.
And we've been trying to, our project has been to try and...
Nat, do we have to get off the air? How much time do we have?
You should close it up.
Okay. Well,
Close it
up. Okay. Just got the discussion going.
Well, you can continue if you want.
Go on. All right. Well, let's conclude, and I really wish there one more time. We're thanking David Greenwald.
Thank you.
And being delighted to have him here in Burlington. And once again, mentioning the title of the book, no reason to talk about it, Families Confront the Nuclear Taboo, which is on sale here in Burlington.
And if I might mention, it's published by Norton. If you can't find it at a bookstore, Norton's in New York.
Okay. Some of us know where New York is. It's down the road. Okay, thanks again. Congratulations, because I think you really dealt with a topic that certainly needs to be dealt with.
Thanks.